All right, since I'm old and can't hear good, if you have a question, yell it out to me. Yes, ma'am?
I've got two for you.
Uh-oh.
In the meeting of people in Roswell, did you ever have the privilege of meeting Glenn Dennis? And is it true that he built the crates for the little bodies from the crash?
Did I ever meet Glenn Dennis, who was a mortician in 1947? Glenn is still alive. He's 92 years old. He's in a rest home. He has Alzheimer's real bad. While I was with the museum, from 96 to 98, Glenn was one of the founders of the museum, along with Walter Haut, the public relations officer, and a local businessman. So I spent every day with with Glenn. For 2.5 years, I was at the museum with him every day. His story never changed about the nurse. Ballard Funeral Home had a contract with the military base, and Glenn got a call that day that an airman was injured in a motorcycle accident in town. So he picked him up, funeral home ambulance, took him out to the base. When he got out there, he saw 2 Army ambulances parked at the rear entrance of the hospital. The doors were open. He saw what he described as gray metal in the back of them. So they had been to the crash site. Went inside, he said, "Has there been a plane crash? Do I need to get the funeral home ready?" They said, "No, it's none of your business, don't worry about it." So about that time, a 6'2" red-headed captain grabbed Glenn Dennis by the shoulder and said, "Glenn, if you go to town and spread any rumors, they'll be finding your bones out in the sand." He said, "That's a big desert. Don't start any rumors." Glenn looked at him, he said, "You can go to hell, I'm a civilian, you can't talk to me like that." Captain said, "I'll talk to you any way I want, you better not start any rumors." By that time, he had a nurse friend came out of the side room, her face covered, nauseated, and said, "Glenn, get out of here before you get in trouble." So Glenn went back to the funeral home. He got a phone call from the funeral home wanting to know what chemicals were involved in embalming fluid and what effect it had on body tissue and stomach contents of a body had been laying out in the desert. He said, "Has it been an emergency?" "Nope, we're just checking." Later that afternoon, he got another phone call from the base. "How many hermetically sealed children's coffins do you have in stock?" Glenn said, "I don't have any, but I can get them out of Amarillo and have them in the morning. Should I order them?" "No, we're just checking." This is BS. In the first place, if the military had a contract with the funeral home, the military would have told them what chemicals to use. They have their own specs. I was in the Army. I know how they operate. None of that makes sense, except the fact that tells us there were all new people at the hospital. Glenn told me several times that he knew every nurse and every doctor out at the hospital because he had a contract with them. He said, "I got out there that day, Dennis. I didn't know anybody except the nurse." We know that they brought a pathologist up from El Paso, from William Bowman Hospital at Fort Bliss. The nurse said she was taking notes for a pathologist that was examining a body. She drew a picture on the back of a prescription pad. She called Glenn the next day, said, "Come out to the officers club, I need to talk to you." So he went out there and she drew a picture on the back of a prescription pad of an alien face and hands. Long arms, 4 fingers, suction cups at the ends of their fingers. Larger than normal head, large eyes, no nose and no ears, just orifices. And she told Glenn the mouth looked like a slit and she wasn't sure they had teeth. Well, she gave that to Glenn. He put it in the safe at the funeral home. Years later, Stanton Friedman and Glenn went by to get that out of the safe and it was no longer there. Glenn don't know if he lost it or if somebody stole it from the safe. So he called out there the next day to talk to the nurse and was told she's no longer here, she's been shipped out. The day after, she was shipped out. So he got an address, he wrote to her, and his letter came back unopened. On the envelope, in red letters, it said deceased. So Glenn did some checking and was told that she was killed in a plane crash in Europe. We've done some checking. There is no record of a plane crash in Europe. Glenn said she was a Catholic, and he thinks she was put in a convent, her name changed, her identity changed, put away where nobody ever could find her. I have a personal opinion of what happened with that nurse. He told me that he met her brother. He flew through town. To me, if you introduce someone to your family, that's more than a casual acquaintance. I think he may have known the nurse really well, and because of that, he may be protecting her and not going to tell us. He sent 2 researchers on a wild goose chase for 5 years with the wrong name. I've never forgiven him for that. The drawing she did, the red-headed captain, those are all key pieces of evidence that we need, and I don't think we'll ever get it. And as many of you know, you can't do this research. You get a lot of leads, but you can't do this research unless you can verify it. You have to have confirmation and verification. Otherwise, it's worthless.
My second question is...
I hope it's shorter than that first one. Go ahead.
Have you ever seen the report that was once issued, that was an interview with Base Commander Costello from the Dulce facility that went into great detail about what was going on down there? Have you ever seen that report?
Have I seen the report by Costello about Dulce? Yeah, I have. And there's also a report by Schneider, Phil Schneider.
Yeah.
I was at Dulce 5, 6 years ago. Norio Hayakawa had a conference up there, invited me up. And I told somebody earlier, while we were there, we expected 10 or 12 people to show up. We had to move it 3 times. We had 100 people, I think, show up for that conference. Most of them Native Americans. That is the headquarters for the Hickory Apache Indian Reservation up in Dulce. And they were not too happy as white people being there. The morning of the conference, we all got woken up about 6 o'clock, heard a helicopter. Walked outside and there's a black unmarked helicopter hovering over the hotel, the only hotel in town. I'm sure he was there taking license plate numbers of everybody that was at the conference. But Native Americans weren't too happy with us being there. And a few of them did talk. And like I told the gentleman earlier, what I gathered from that conference from the Native Americans was that if they see something in the sky, they think it's personal, and they don't want to talk about it. I did ask a Native American, and I got a few links on my website from Native Americans, and I'd like to get more, because they have star knowledge. They know things. But I asked this one day, I said, why don't you people talk about this? And he looked at me, and I loved his answer. Nobody asked. I couldn't believe it. Nobody asked. So apparently they have the information, nobody's asking for it. But I have mixed emotions about Dulce. I'm not sure of it yet. This Scott Ramsey that wrote this book about Aztec, he's been on top of that mesa, the Hickory Apache, or the mesa up there. He has found some mining equipment. I did talk to the state policeman who used to be handling all the cattle mutilation cases up there. And off to the side, I was standing with him, and we were talking about it. He said, it didn't happen on the mesa. I said, where did it happen? Oh, I can't tell you. That was his answer. So I don't know. But I think it may be a diversionary site up on the mesa. But I think it's in that area.
Nothing there.
Not on top of the mesa.
We've walked that thing, we've driven that thing.
I agree, but that's not what I said. What I said, I think it's a diversionary site for someplace else in that area.
About 45 miles on in on the reservation.
Yeah.
And it's marked too.
Yeah.
You know, with,
Now, something I didn't share in the lecture, I got to meet Edgar Mitchell, the astronaut, 3 times. Did a couple of conferences with him. And we were up in Angel Fire. He went outside, I followed him, because I'd heard he knew something about Roswell. He's from just south of Roswell. His family had ranch down there. I said, Dr. Mitchell, what do you know about Roswell? He looked at me, looked me right in the eye. He said, it happened. I said, oh? I said, how do you know? He said, my folks knew the ranchers, and he said, my military career, I knew enough people that I can tell you it happened. I said, what else can you tell me? He said, that's all I can tell you. It happened. But I'll tell you what, coming from Dr. Mitchell, I'm going to take that and run, because Mitchell is one of the sharpest guys I have ever met in my life. He was the 6th man on the moon. And he also told me we have 2 governments. We have a black government and a elected government. I said, who do they answer to? He said, they don't. I said, they have to answer to somebody. He said, no, they don't answer to anybody. He said, they pull the punches. So, yes, sir.
And you touched in part on something, the Philadelphia experiment with the Eldridge, and it seems like everything I've read on it, everything I've watched on it, I have more questions than answers. I knew basically that the United States military was working for a way to try to make naval ships invisible to the Nazis, and they had Albert Einstein involved on the project. And this Eldridge, the ship, disappeared. Supposedly, some of the sailors who were found on it afterwards had partially dematerialized and rematerialized, meshed in with the metal of the ship.
Right.
Anything you have to say on the Philadelphia experiment?
You know as much as I do. I haven't given up on it. It's been debunked by a lot of people, but I think there's something to it. I really do. I don't rule the Navy out for a lot of this stuff. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if the Roswell incident information isn't being hidden by the Navy. It'd be the last place you'd look. But that's the way they operate. But good point, and you had the information that I've heard also, yeah. Jim?
Noticed on that map that had underground.
Oh, I knew you would get to that.
That there was one from Fort Stockton that went into Mexico. What is that about?
I don't know much of the details on that, and I can't even tell you where I got that map. I've had it so long. But we believe that most of the military bases, particularly in the western United States, are interconnected with tunnels, Leviathan trains and things like that. Everything has to be done underground now because of satellites. I know when satellites first started going out at Area 51, if they'd put a new airplane up on a pylon to check radar, they could put it up there. When the Russian satellite came over, they had to take it off, put it in a hangar. Take it out, put it up, take it out, put it up. They did that every hour and 15 minutes when the satellite came around. So they got smart. They painted the silhouette of an airplane on the runway out there, put a 55-gallon drum in the back and made it look like an engine. Russians thought we had a new airplane. And in fact, it was just painted on the thing. But they finally started doing everything underground. And I really don't know how many of the bases are interconnected, but I think a lot of them. Yes, sir.
I can't think of the lady's name. She's about the same age I am. She was the daughter of a fireman that went
Frankie Rowe. Frankie Rowe.
Frankie Rowe, yeah. Is she still alive?
She is still alive. She also cries on cue on camera.
Oh, really?
Her daddy worked for the Roswell Fire Department. I can't believe that the Roswell Fire Department was going 65 miles to the crash site and giving up the fire protection in town for that. I don't buy that. And Frankie claims to have been threatened, that her daddy was threatened and all that. She's a neat lady, I like her, but she really does on every TV show I've seen her on. She pretty much cries on cue, and I have a lot of questions about her story. And that's the thing about Roswell. I mean, there's a lot of factual information, but you got to prove it. And if you can't prove it, forget it. It's not going to fly.
I just cry when I watch the news.
Amen to that. Yes, sir.
There was an affidavit, I think, by Haut after.
Oh, there were 3 affidavits by Haut.
What can you tell us about that whole situation?
The first one he did was through Max Littell, who was one of the co-founders of the museum with him. 1998, there was a French film crew in Roswell. They filmed me out at the hangar, and then they went to film Walter Haut. Walter was the public relations officer for the base. He wrote the article for the newspaper. So they wanted to film Walter. So I went to the museum and sat in on it just to listen. Walter slipped up during that interview and said, "I saw a body in the hangar." Lights went on, flags went up. Never had heard that. I went outside with another researcher and I said, "Did you hear what I heard?" "Yeah." I said, "I've got to get him on tape." So I did an oral history in 1999, 3.5 hours with Wendy Connors, and we did Walter. And he again admitted that he had seen a body. Now, Walter had all his life only said that he wrote the article. That's all he knew. So when I heard that about seeing a body in the hangar, that got my attention. The last affidavit that Walter wrote was written by Don Schmidt, the researcher. Walter didn't write it. And if you read that thing, it's pretty much what I got in the interview with Walter. And I haven't pushed it. I have a copyright on the interview, by the way. But I think Walter probably did see a body. Him and Colonel Blanchard were very close, the base commander. And Colonel Blanchard was advanced to a 4-star general at the Pentagon. He was the Assistant Joint Chief of Staff, considered for Joint Chief, the top job in the military. That's a heck of an advancement, from a colonel to a 4-star general, over somebody that screwed up on a weather balloon and a flying saucer. Walter was the 3rd person notified of General Blanchard's death. They sent 2 airmen down to Roswell to tell Walter that General Blanchard had died. So they had a real close relationship. So I do think he could have got him permission to go in the hangar and see the body. But there's a lot of controversy over those affidavits. Yes, you're back again. Go ahead.
Yeah. Didn't Corso admit in his book that one of his underlings, once the stuff was up at Wright-Patterson, that they told him to peep into one of the crates that was in the hangar, and he saw a body? Am I confused on that?
She's talking about Lieutenant Colonel Phil Corso, who wrote The Day After Roswell.
Yeah.
Excellent book. I mean, you flip pages, you get to the next page. If any of you have read that book, or want to read that book, look in the very back of the book. There's not one reference. Not one. I met Corso 3 times before he died. In fact, he went public with the book at the UFO Museum when I was there. So I got to know him pretty well and liked him as a guy. But nothing in the back of the book to back it. And half that book was written by Bill Burns of UFO Magazine. Need I say more? I mean, I like Bill, but you know, you don't know how much Bill wrote and how much Corso wrote. I talked to Corso's son, and he said that Dad had more information to present. But if you don't have backup for it, it's not worth anything. Corso claimed that we got fiber optics, microchips, night vision, lasers off the craft. That he had access to the files at the Pentagon, gave that information to industries, and we got this stuff. Well, microchips were invented by Texas Instruments. The guy got the Nobel Peace Prize. We're already working on night vision, captured stuff from the Germans, which is the old red night vision, and then we had the green. What he said was a very possible scenario. It could have been, but without...
I always felt maybe he was saying that our knowledge of that was accelerated by what they learned.
Well, it could have been, but he has nothing to back it up. Stanton Friedman and I both checked on him claiming to be with the NSA. He never was a member of the NSA. He may have attended a meeting or two, but he was not a member like he said he was. So I don't know why he wrote what he wrote, and we just have to go from there.
Mind control?
Huh?
Mind control?
Possibly. Yes, ma'am.
Have you heard any connection between what you were talking about and Huntsville, Alabama?
Huntsville was where they did a lot of the rocket work. Basically, that's all I know about Huntsville. Did I see a hand back there? Yes, sir.
You mentioned microchips. When I was in the Navy, I was working in the Pentagon, and my mother was a gold badge member retiring out of Texas Instruments. She started in the 50s. And so she had access to any place at Texas Instruments. And one day she was giving me a tour when I was coming home from the Navy. And out walks, she took me underground to their underground city portion of Texas Instruments. And it was like a big, huge vault. Out pops this guy that I knew in the Pentagon. And he goes, "What are you doing here?" I said, "What are you doing here?"
Yeah.
You know, but when you mentioned that about the microchips, that
Yeah. Yeah, they
went
were.
off in my head, and you know, those places, the city, you know, an underground city. There's one at Texas Instruments.
Yep.
And it connects to a building on the other side of Central Expressway. It's all in black glass. You never see anybody outside.
Yeah.
Just people inside, and then they go underground to
Yeah.
that.
Thank you for sharing that. I think, you know, if you look at the technology, this will be my last. If you look at the technology we've developed in the last, let's say 50 years, pretty amazing. We can't go out there. So, if they can come here, they're probably 100, 1,000, 10,000 years ahead of us. People ask me, why don't we communicate with them? I don't think we can. I don't go in the backyard and talk to insects. Basically the same thing. I think they're so far advanced of us that there's no way. I think they're here, I really believe they're here to observe us, because they've had every opportunity to do harm if they wanted to and haven't. So I think they're probably here just to observe us, make sure we don't self-destruct. And we're headed that way. You know, we're war people, the only species on the planet that can't get along with each other. So hopefully, you know, we'll get some answers. I'm 71, I don't look for it to happen in my remaining lifetime. I was hopeful it would, but I don't think it will. I just don't look for them to go public with it. I'm not a big disclosure fan. I don't think it's going to happen. I don't know who in our government is going to admit they lied to us for 65 years. I don't see that happening. So, but thank you. Y'all been a great audience. I got some stuff back there from by the table.